The summer sun felt warm on Director Michelle Carter's shoulders as she walked through the crowded farmers market. For the first time in 3 weeks, she wasn't wearing a suit. No bulletproof vest. No earpiece connecting her to a dozen agents. Just a simple flowered gown, sandals, and her natural hair flowing free in the breeze. She looked like any other woman enjoying her Saturday afternoon. Michelle had been craving this moment. Being the director of the FBI meant living in a constant state of high alert. Every meeting was critical. Every decision could affect thousands of lives. The weight of it all had been crushing her lately, especially after the last case, a trafficking ring that had taken everything her team had to dismantle. She needed to feel normal again, even if just for an hour. The market was buzzing with life. Families browsed through tables of fresh vegetables. Children chased each other between the stalls while their parents haggled over prices. The smell of fresh bread mixed with the scent of flowers and grilled food. Michelle stopped at a stand selling handmade jewelry, running her fingers over a silver bracelet. It reminded her of one her grandmother used to wear. "Beautiful, isn't it?" the vendor said with a warm smile. "Made it myself," Michelle smiled back. "It really is." "How much?" As the vendor started to answer, raised voices cut through the pleasant atmosphere. Michelle's training kicked in automatically. Her head turned toward the sound, eyes scanning for the source. 3 stalls down, she could see a crowd beginning to form. People were pulling out their phones, that universal sign that something was going down. She shouldn't get involved. This was her day off. She was just another shopper. But curiosity got the better of her, and she found herself walking toward the commotion. The bracelet forgotten. 2 police officers had cornered a teenage boy against a fruit stand. The kid couldn't have been more than 16, skinny and tall, wearing a basketball jersey and holding a skateboard like it was a shield. His eyes were wide with fear, the kind of fear Michelle had seen too many times in her career. "Empty your pockets. Now," the older officer barked. His nameplate read Officer Daniels. He was a thick-built man with graying hair and the kind of stance that said he was used to being obeyed. "I didn't do anything," the boy said, his voice shaking. "I was just skating with my friends. We got a report of shoplifting." "You match the description," the younger officer added. Officer Brooks looked fresh out of the academy, eager to prove himself. Michelle stopped at the edge of the growing crowd. Something felt wrong about this. The boy looked genuinely confused and scared. He was cooperating, pulling out his pockets to show they were empty except for a phone and a few crumpled bills. But the officers weren't backing down. "The description of what?" Michelle heard herself ask. Her voice carried that calm authority she'd developed over 20 years in law enforcement. Officer Daniels barely glanced at her. "Ma'am, step back. This is official police business. I'm just asking what he's supposed to have stolen," Michelle said, not moving. Around her, other people were watching, filming. She could feel the tension in the air. Someone reported a theft from their stall. "This young man fits the description." Daniel's tone made it clear he didn't appreciate being questioned. Michelle looked at the boy, then at the officers. "What description? Can you be specific?" The vendor who'd apparently made the complaint was standing nearby, a nervous-looking woman who kept wringing her hands. "I saw someone take money from my cash box. A teenage boy with a skateboard. Did you see this specific boy take the money?" Michelle pressed, her investigator instincts fully engaged now. The woman hesitated. "Well, no, but... So you're saying any teenage boy with a skateboard is a suspect?" Michelle kept her voice level, but there was an edge to it. Officer Daniels' face reddened. "Ma'am, I'm not going to ask you again. Move along or you'll be interfering with an investigation." Michelle noticed something the officers seemed to have missed. About 20 feet away, another teenage boy was quietly trying to slip through the crowd. He was white, wearing a red hoodie despite the heat, and he had a backpack that looked suspiciously full. More importantly, he kept glancing back at the scene with the kind of guilty nervousness Michelle had learned to recognize. "Officers," she said, pointing discreetly. "There's another possible suspect heading toward the parking lot." Officer Brooks finally looked where she was pointing, but Officer Daniels wasn't interested. "Lady, you need to mind your business." "I am minding my business. This is a public space and I have every right to observe." Michelle's tone remained calm but firm. She'd dealt with difficult people before, though usually they were on the other side of an interrogation table. The boy in the red hoodie was getting away. Michelle could see him picking up speed, weaving between cars. But the officers were focused entirely on the teenager in front of them, who was now visibly trembling. "Please," the boy said. "My mom's gonna freak out. I didn't steal anything. I swear." Something in Michelle snapped. Maybe it was 3 weeks of stress. Maybe it was seeing the fear in this kid's eyes. Maybe it was watching what looked like a clear case of racial profiling unfold in front of her. Whatever it was, she couldn't just walk away. "Officers, I really think you should consider looking at the other suspect before." "That's it." Officer Daniels moved toward Michelle, his hand moving to his belt. "You're interfering with a police investigation. I'm placing you under arrest," the crowd gasped. Phones shifted to point at Michelle. She saw the vendor from the jewelry stall, mouth open in shock. The nervous woman who'd made the complaint looked horrified. "Officer, I think you're making a mistake," Michelle said quietly. Her heart was pounding, but she kept her breathing steady. "The only one making a mistake here is you." "Lady," Officer Brooks said, moving around to her side. Michelle didn't resist, but she didn't make it easy either. She stood her ground, maintaining eye contact with Officer Daniels. "I'm not resisting, but you should know." "Save it," Daniels cut her off. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." This was really happening. Michelle Carter, director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, was about to be arrested at a farmer's market while wearing a summer gown and sandals. The absurdity of it would have been funny if it wasn't so infuriating. As she turned following their instructions, her gown caught on Officer Daniels's equipment belt. She felt the fabric pull, heard the terrible sound of tearing cloth. The gown ripped from her shoulder down to her mid-back, exposing her skin to the crowd. The gasp from the onlookers was louder this time. Michelle felt the hot rush of humiliation flood her face. She grabbed at the torn fabric, trying to hold it together, but Officer Brooks was already pulling her arms back to cuff her. "Hey, that's not right," someone shouted from the crowd. "Record everything," another voice called out. The teenage boy looked absolutely stricken. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault." Michelle met his eyes. Despite everything, despite the torn gown and the cold metal of handcuffs clicking around her wrists, she managed to keep her voice steady. "It's not your fault, son. Don't you ever think that." Officer Daniels was radioing for their patrol car. Officer Brooks was reading Michelle her rights in a monotone voice that suggested he'd done this 1,000 times. The crowd was still filming, still murmuring. Michelle stood there, holding the torn fabric of her gown with cuffed hands, and realized that sometimes the universe has a way of teaching you lessons you didn't know you needed to learn. She'd spent years making decisions from the top, issuing orders, directing operations. Now she was about to experience the system from the other side. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice said this was going to change everything. The walk to the patrol car felt like miles, even though it was only about 50 feet. Michelle kept her head up, refusing to look down despite the torn gown and the whispers following her through the crowd. Her shoulders ached from the position of the handcuffs, tighter than they needed to be. Officer Daniels had his hand on her elbow, gripping harder than necessary, steering her like she was dangerous. People stared. Some looked away quickly, uncomfortable. Others kept their phones up, recording every second. Michelle knew those videos would be online within minutes. She wondered briefly what her security team would think when they saw them. How long before someone recognized her? The patrol car sat in the parking lot with its lights off. Officer Brooks opened the back door, and Michelle had to duck awkwardly to get inside without using her hands. The seat was hard plastic, uncomfortable by design. It smelled like cleaning chemicals mixed with something sour she didn't want to identify. Through the window, she could still see the scene at the market. The teenage boy was being questioned by another officer who'd arrived. The kid kept looking toward the patrol car, guilt and fear written all over his young face. The vendor was talking rapidly, gesturing. And the crowd was still there, still watching, still recording. What bothered Michelle most was that the boy in the red hoodie was long gone. She'd watched him disappear into the parking lot while the officers were busy with her, the actual thief probably, getting away while they arrested people for the crime of asking questions and existing while black. Officer Daniels climbed into the driver's seat while Brooks took the passenger side. Neither of them looked back at her. The radio crackled with police codes and static. Daniels reported their status, transporting one suspect to the precinct for booking on charges of interference and obstruction. Suspect. The word stung more than Michelle expected. The drive to the precinct took about 10 minutes. They didn't speak to her, Didn't ask if she was comfortable, didn't loosen the cuffs even though she wasn't resisting. Standard procedure maybe, but Michelle made mental notes of every violation of basic human decency. She'd reviewed thousands of arrest reports in her career. She'd never realized how cold and impersonal the process felt from this side. The precinct was a squat brick building that had probably been built in the 70s and hadn't been updated much since. They pulled into the back lot and parked near a metal door marked, "Authorized personnel only." The irony wasn't lost on Michelle. She was about as authorized as personnel got, but here she was, being hauled in like a criminal. Officer Brooks opened her door. "Watch your head." Michelle climbed out awkwardly, still clutching her torn gown with her cuffed hands. A few other officers in the parking lot glanced over with mild curiosity before going back to their conversations. Just another arrest. Nothing special. Happened every day. Inside, the precinct smelled like stale coffee and floor wax. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a harsh white glow. The booking area was busy with people being processed. A drunk man was arguing loudly with an officer at one desk. A woman with smeared makeup sat crying quietly on a bench. And now Michelle, still in her torn summer gown, joining the lineup. The desk sergeant was a tired-looking man with a gray mustache who barely looked up when they brought her in. Name? Michelle Elizabeth Carter. He typed it slowly, two-finger style. Date of birth? Michelle gave it. The routine questions continued. Address, emergency contact, occupation. Federal employee, Michelle said when he asked about her job. The sergeant smirked without looking up. Yeah, half of Maryland works for the government. Which agency? Michelle paused. She could tell him now. And this whole thing. But something made her hold back. Maybe she wanted to see how far this would go. Maybe she needed to experience the full weight of the system she'd been running. I'd prefer to speak with a supervisor. The sergeant finally looked at her, taking in the torn gown, her natural hair, the defiant set of her jaw. You can speak to whoever you want after processing. Right now, answer the question. I'd like to make a phone call. You'll get your call after processing. He went back to his form. Occupation? Federal employee. That's all I'm saying right now. He sighed and wrote something down, probably marked her as uncooperative. They took her fingerprints next, rolling each finger across the electronic scanner. The officer doing it was young, barely out of his 20s, and he wouldn't meet her eyes. Michelle wondered if he felt uncomfortable or if this was just another day for him. The mugshot came next. They stood her against a height chart and took photos from the front and both sides. Michelle kept her expression neutral, refusing to look defeated. The camera flashed, capturing this moment that would probably haunt her later. Then came the personal effects. They had her empty her pockets, phone, wallet, the $20 she'd brought for the market. They itemized everything, put it in a plastic bag, made her sign for it. Her phone screen showed 6 missed calls. Her security detail was definitely looking for her by now. I need to make that call now, Michelle said firmly. The sergeant nodded toward a phone on the wall. Local calls only. You get 3 minutes. Michelle walked to the phone, her torn gown drawing looks from everyone in the booking area. She picked up the receiver, her hand still aching from the cuffs they'd finally removed, and dialed a number she knew by heart. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Special Agent Crawford. James, it's me. There was a pause. Director? Where are you? We've been trying to reach you for 40 minutes. Your GPS signal. I'm at the Riverside County Precinct. I've been arrested. Another pause, longer this time. When Crawford spoke again, his voice was tight with barely controlled anger. I'm sorry, did you say arrested? For obstruction and interference. It's a long story, but James, I need you to do something for me first. There's a teenage boy there, probably still being questioned. Basketball jersey, has a skateboard. Make sure he's okay. Make sure he gets released. He didn't do anything wrong. Director, with all due respect, I'm more concerned about you right now. The boy first, James. That's an order. Then you can come get me and bring someone from legal. We're going to need them. She could hear him barking orders to other agents in the background. We'll be there in 15 minutes. 20 at most. Are you hurt? Michelle looked down at her torn gown, at the bruises already forming on her arms where Daniels had gripped too hard. I'm fine. Just make sure that boy is okay. Yes, ma'am. Director, what the hell happened? I'll explain everything when you get here. 15 minutes, James. She hung up and turned around. The desk sergeant was watching her with new interest. Who'd you call? My lawyer. He grunted and gestured toward a hallway. You'll wait in holding until we finish processing. The holding cell was small, just a bench along one wall and a toilet in the corner with no privacy. 2 other women were already there. One was sleeping curled up on the bench. The other, a woman maybe in her 30s with tired eyes, looked Michelle up and down. Rough day? She asked, nodding at the torn gown. Michelle sat down on the end of the bench, still holding the fabric together. You could say that. What did they get you for? Asking questions, apparently. The woman laughed, but it was bitter. Yeah, they don't like that. I got mouthy with a cop who pulled me over for a broken taillight. Now I'm here on disorderly conduct. 3rd time this year. She shook her head. System's rigged, you know? They can do whatever they want, and we just have to take it. Michelle thought about that. How many people went through this every day? How many were arrested on flimsy charges, processed through the system, and left with records that would follow them forever? She'd seen the statistics. She'd read the reports. But sitting here in a holding cell with her gown torn and her dignity stripped away, the numbers suddenly had faces. Had feelings. Had weight. You got people coming for you? The woman asked. Yeah, Michelle said quietly. Yeah, I do. Good, that makes a difference. I'm probably here till Monday. Can't make bail? She leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes. Such is life. Michelle sat there in the holding cell, listening to the sounds of the precinct. Voices, footsteps, ringing phones, the buzz of the fluorescent lights. Somewhere in this building, Officer Daniels and Officer Brooks were probably filling out paperwork, not giving her a second thought. Just another arrest, just another day. But in about 10 minutes, their world was going to change. Michelle almost felt sorry for them. Almost. She checked the clock on the wall. 12 minutes had passed since her call. Crawford would be here soon, probably with 6 agents and enough legal authority to shake this entire building to its foundation. Part of her wanted to see the looks on everyone's faces. But another part of her, the part that had just experienced the system from the other side, felt sad. Because this wasn't really about her. It was about every person who sat in these cells without the power to make a phone call that would matter. Every person who got arrested for asking questions or looking suspicious or just being in the wrong place with the wrong color skin. She had the authority to walk out of here and make changes. But what about everyone else? The woman on the bench opened her eyes. You're awfully quiet. Most people in here either can't stop talking or won't say a word. You're somewhere in between. Michelle smiled slightly. Just thinking. About how sometimes you have to see things from a different angle to really understand them. The woman nodded like she understood, even though she probably didn't. Not really. How could she know that the woman sitting next to her in a torn gown was about to turn this entire precinct upside down? Outside the cell, Michelle heard raised voices, footsteps moving fast. The energy in the building was changing. She could feel it. It was time. The precinct doors didn't just open. They burst open. The sound echoed through the building like a gunshot, making everyone in the booking area look up. Michelle heard it from the holding cell and allowed herself a small smile. Crawford was here and he wasn't happy. Where is Director Carter? His voice carried through the entire precinct, sharp and commanding. Michelle could picture him standing there in his tactical gear, wearing the expression he reserved for particularly difficult situations. From her spot on the bench, she couldn't see what was happening, but she could hear everything. The desk sergeant sputtering, chairs scraping, multiple footsteps. Someone dropped something that clattered across the floor. The precinct had gone from routine Saturday afternoon to complete chaos in about 5 seconds. Director? What director? That was the desk sergeant, his voice pitched higher than before. Michelle Elizabeth Carter, Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Where is she? Crawford's words came out like bullets. The silence that followed was deafening. Michelle could imagine everyone in that booking area stopping what they were doing, processing, understanding, realizing. Oh, God. The desk sergeant's voice was barely above a whisper. Oh, my God. The woman from the market. You arrested the director of the FBI? Another voice, deeper, probably a captain or supervisor. You arrested the director of the FBI? We didn't know. That was Officer Brooks, panic clear in his tone. She didn't say anything. She just said she was a federal employee. Michelle stood up. The woman on the bench with her was staring, mouth open. Who are you? She whispered. Before Michelle could answer, keys jangled outside the cell door. A young officer appeared, his face pale, hands shaking as he unlocked the door. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry." "We're so sorry. Please come with me." Michelle walked out of the holding cell with her head high, still clutching her torn gown. The woman on the bench called after her, "Hey, don't forget about us in here." Michelle paused, looked back. "I won't, I promise." The walk back to the booking area felt completely different from when they'd brought her in. Now officers were standing at attention, looking anywhere but at her. The captain, she could see his bars now, looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. And there was Crawford, flanked by 3 other agents, all wearing expressions that could melt steel. Behind them stood a man in an expensive suit carrying a briefcase. Federal attorney, clearly. He looked ready to sue everyone in the building. Crawford's eyes went immediately to Michelle's torn gown and the bruises on her arms. His jaw clenched so tight she thought she heard his teeth grind. "Director, are you hurt?" "I'm fine, Crawford." "Where's the boy? The teenager from the market?" "Already released, ma'am. His mother picked him up about 5 minutes ago. He's shaken but unharmed." Michelle felt a weight lift off her shoulders. "Good, that's good." The captain stepped forward, sweat visible on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Director Carter, I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry I am for this misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" The federal attorney cut in sharply. "You arrested and physically assaulted the director of the FBI. Her clothing was torn during the arrest. She was processed and held in a cell. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a federal incident. Please," the captain, his nameplate read Captain Morrison, looked desperate. "If we'd had any idea who she was." "That's exactly the problem," Michelle said quietly. Everyone stopped talking. Her voice might have been soft, but it commanded the room. "If you'd had any idea who I was, you would have treated me differently. But because you didn't know, because you saw a black woman in a summer gown asking questions, you felt comfortable manhandling me, tearing my clothes, throwing me in a cell." She paused, letting it sink in. "Tell me, Captain Morrison, would this have happened if I was a white woman in a business suit?" Morrison opened his mouth, closed it. No answer came. "I want to speak with Officers Daniels and Brooks now." "They're in my office," Morrison said quickly. "They've been suspended pending investigation." "I didn't ask about their employment status. I said I want to speak with them." Morrison practically ran down the hallway. The booking area remained silent. Officers who'd been processing other arrests just stood there. The drunk man who'd been arguing earlier was quiet now, watching everything with wide eyes. The crying woman had stopped crying and was staring at Michelle like she'd seen a ghost. Crawford moved closer to Michelle, lowering his voice. "Director, we have a car waiting. We can get you out of here, get you changed, and—" "Not yet." Michelle's voice was firm. "I need to see this through. Ma'am, you're the victim here. You don't owe them anything. I'm not doing this for them, James. I'm doing it for every person who goes through this and doesn't have a team of federal agents coming to rescue them." Crawford nodded, understanding. He stepped back, but his hand stayed near his service weapon. The other agents formed a loose perimeter around Michelle, protective but not aggressive. Morrison returned with Daniels and Brooks in tow. Both officers looked like they'd aged 10 years in the last half hour. Daniels' confident swagger was completely gone. Brooks couldn't even lift his eyes from the floor. Michelle studied them for a long moment. She'd interrogated terrorists, questioned mobsters, stared down cartel leaders, but these 2 officers, standing in their own precinct looking terrified, might have been the most important interview of her career. "Look at me," she said. Slowly, reluctantly, they raised their eyes. "Do you know why you're in this situation right now?" Daniels cleared his throat. "We arrested you without knowing—" "No." Michelle's voice was sharp. "Try again. Why are you in this situation?" Brooks spoke up, his voice cracking. "We made assumptions. We profiled that kid based on race. And when you questioned us, we felt threatened and—" "Keep going. We escalated when we should have de-escalated. We used force that wasn't necessary. We were wrong." Brooks looked like he might cry. "We were wrong about everything." Michelle nodded slowly. "What you did to me today, you've done to other people. Haven't you?" "Silence, answer me." Daniels finally spoke. "Yes, ma'am. I've been on the force 22 years. And yeah, I've made assumptions. I've profiled people. I thought I was doing my job, but..." He trailed off. "But you were abusing your authority," Michelle finished for him. You were using your badge and your power to harass people who couldn't fight back. And it took arresting someone with more power than you to make you realize it. She looked around the booking area, at all the officers watching. How many of you have done the same thing? How many of you have stopped someone because they looked suspicious? Which really meant they were black or brown and in the wrong neighborhood. How many of you have used excessive force because you knew they couldn't fight back? No one answered. The silence was damning. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen now, Michelle continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. I'm going to make sure that video of my arrest stays public. I don't want it buried or deleted. I want people to see exactly what happened here today. Morrison looked horrified. Director, surely we can reach some kind of agreement. I'm not finished. Michelle's eyes were hard. This precinct is going to undergo a complete review. Every arrest for the past 5 years sorted by race. Every complaint filed. Every use of force reported. We're going to see patterns, and we're going to fix them. She turned back to Daniels and Brooks. You two will cooperate fully with federal investigators. You'll participate in training programs, and you'll face whatever charges are deemed appropriate. But more than that, you're going to become examples. You're going to show other officers what happens when you forget that the badge is supposed to protect everyone, not just the people who look like you. Daniels nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. I want to make something clear, Michelle said, addressing the entire room now. I'm not doing this out of revenge. I'm not doing this because my feelings were hurt. I'm doing this because that teenage boy at the market could have been my son. Because that woman in the holding cell who can't make bail could have been my sister. Because every single day people experience what I experienced today, but they don't have a team of federal agents to rescue them. She paused, making eye contact with as many officers as she could. You have power. The question is, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to use it to protect and serve like you swore to do? Or are you going to keep using it to intimidate and control? Crawford handed Michelle his FBI windbreaker. She pulled it on over her torn gown gratefully, though the damage was done. The bruises would fade. The torn gown could be thrown away, but the memory of this day would stay with her forever. There's one more thing, Michelle said, turning to Morrison. That boy from the market. His name is Kevin, and he's 16 years old. He wants to be an engineer. He's never been in trouble in his life. Today, he was terrorized by your officers because he was black and had a skateboard. I want a formal apology issued to him and his family, in writing, signed by everyone involved. Of course, Morrison said quickly. Absolutely. Whatever you need. And the real thief? The boy in the red hoodie? One of the agents spoke up. We picked him up trying to leave town. Had stolen merchandise from 3 different vendors. He's being processed now. Make sure that's noted in all official reports. Make sure everyone knows that your officers arrested innocent people while the actual criminal escaped. Michelle looked around one last time, at the officers avoiding her gaze. At the captain who'd aged 10 years in one afternoon, at Daniels and Brooks who were learning the hardest lesson of their careers. I'm leaving now, she said, but I'll be back. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. As she walked toward the door, flanked by her security team, she passed the holding cells. The woman she'd spoken to earlier was pressed against the bars watching. Hey, the woman called out. Are you really going to remember us? Michelle stopped. Yes, I'm really going to remember. Things are going to change. I'll believe it when I see it, the woman said, but there was hope in her voice. Michelle nodded. Watch the news. You'll see it. Outside, the late afternoon sun was still shining. The market would be closing down now. Vendors packing up their tables. Life going on like normal. But nothing was normal. Anymore, not for Michelle. Not for this precinct. Not for anyone involved. Crawford opened the car door for her. Where to, Director? Michelle settled into the seat, finally allowing herself to feel the exhaustion, the humiliation, the anger. Home. I need to change clothes and figure out what comes next. What does come next? Michelle looked out the window at the precinct building. Change, James, real change. Whatever it takes. The video hit social media while Michelle was still in the car heading home. Crawford's phone started buzzing first, then the phones of the other agents in the vehicle. Within minutes, what had happened at the farmer's market was trending nationwide. Director, you need to see this, Crawford said, holding up his phone. The video was shaky, filmed from multiple angles by different people in the crowd. There she was, standing calmly in her flowered gown, asking the officers questions. There was the teenage boy, clearly scared. And there was the moment when it all went wrong. Daniels grabbing her arm, the gown tearing, her standing there trying to hold the fabric together while they cuffed her. The comments were already pouring in by the thousands. This is America in 2025. They did this to the FBI director. Imagine what they do to regular people. Notice how they ignored the white kid running away. This is why we need reform now. Michelle watched the video play again. It was strange seeing herself from the outside, seeing what the crowd had seen. She looked dignified even in the worst moment, even with her gown torn and her hands being cuffed behind her back. But she also looked vulnerable in a way that made her uncomfortable. The world was seeing her at her lowest point. Should we issue a statement? Crawford asked carefully. Not yet. Let people see it first. Let them form their own opinions. By the time they reached her house in the suburbs, news vans were already parked on the street. Reporters called out questions as the car pulled into the driveway. Crawford and the other agents formed a barrier, getting Michelle inside without her having to answer anything. Her home felt like a sanctuary. Michelle went straight to her bedroom, peeled off the FBI windbreaker and the torn gown, and stood in front of the mirror. The bruises on her arms were darkening, clear finger marks where Daniels had gripped her. Her shoulder was red where the fabric had ripped. She looked like someone who'd been in a fight. She showered, letting the hot water wash away the feeling of the holding cell, the smell of the precinct, the humiliation of it all. But it couldn't wash away the memories, the fear in Kevin's eyes, the resignation in the voice of the woman in the holding cell, the casual cruelty of officers who'd forgotten they were supposed to serve. When she emerged in comfortable clothes, her chief of staff was waiting in the living room with Crawford. Margaret Chen had been with Michelle for 8 years, through promotions and crises and late-night emergency calls. But Michelle had never seen her look quite this angry. The Attorney General called, Margaret said without preamble. So did the Secretary of Homeland Security, the mayor of Riverside County, and about 30 different news organizations. Everyone wants a statement. What did you tell them? That you'd address it when you're ready. Margaret paused. The video has been viewed 40 million times in 2 hours. Michelle, this is huge. This is national news. International even. Michelle sat down on her couch, suddenly feeling every minute of this very long day. What are people saying? Margaret pulled out her tablet, scrolling through. Public opinion is overwhelmingly on your side. People are furious. There are already protests being organized at police stations across the country. Civil rights leaders are calling for federal investigations, and the Riverside County precinct is under siege by reporters. She kept scrolling. But there's also pushback. Police unions are saying this is an isolated incident being blown out of proportion. Some conservative commentators are suggesting you should have identified yourself immediately. There's the usual divide you'd expect. Crawford spoke up. The White House called too. They want you to know you have their full support. Michelle nodded slowly. The political machinery was already churning. Everyone trying to figure out how to respond, whose side to take, what position to stake out. It was exhausting just thinking about it. I want to hold a press conference, Michelle said. Tomorrow morning. I want to address this while people are still paying attention. Are you sure? Margaret looked concerned. You could take a few days, let things settle. No, if I wait, the narrative gets away from me. Other people start defining what happened. I need to speak while people are still watching that video, while they're still feeling what they felt when they saw it. Margaret nodded, making notes. I'll set it up. But Michelle, you should know this is going to change everything. Once you step in front of those cameras, there's no going back. You'll be putting yourself at the center of a national conversation about race and policing. I'm already at the center of it. I didn't choose this, Margaret, but I'm not going to hide from it either. That night, Michelle couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Kevin, hoping his mother had held him and told him everything would be okay. She thought about the woman in the holding cell, probably still there, unable to make bail for a crime that probably shouldn't have even been an arrest. She thought about Daniels and Brooks and whether people could really change or if patterns ran too deep. Around midnight, her personal phone rang. It was her mother. Michelle? Baby, I just saw the news. Are you okay? Just hearing her mother's voice made Michelle's throat tight. I'm okay, Mom, really. They tore your dress. They put handcuffs on you. Her mother's voice broke. My baby girl who worked so hard to become director of the FBI. And they treated you like a criminal. I know. Mom. Your father would have been so angry. Her father had been a police officer himself, one of the first black officers in their town. He died 5 years ago and Michelle still missed him every day. Yeah, he would have. But you know what else? He would have understood. He saw this kind of thing all the time from both sides. He tried to change it from the inside. And you're going to do the same thing. It wasn't a question. Her mother knew her too well. I'm going to try. You be careful, Michelle. When you start shaking things up, people push back. Powerful people, I know. But I have to do this. Not just for me. For everyone who goes through this and doesn't have my platform. After they hung up, Michelle sat in her dark living room, looking out at the news vans still parked on her street. Tomorrow she'd face those cameras. Tomorrow she'd tell her story. But more importantly, she'd challenge the entire country to look at itself honestly. The next morning came too quickly. Michelle dressed carefully, a professional Navy suit, hair pulled back, minimal makeup. She wanted to look like the director of the FBI. But she also wanted to look like the woman in that video, both sides of the same coin. The press conference was held at FBI headquarters. The room was packed with reporters, cameras from every major network and dozens of international outlets. As Michelle walked to the podium, flashbulbs went off like fireworks. She laid her notes on the podium but didn't look at them. This needed to come from the heart. Good morning. By now, many of you have seen the video of my arrest yesterday at a farmer's market in Riverside County. I'm here today to address what happened, why it matters, and what we're going to do about it. The room was absolutely silent. I went to that market as a private citizen enjoying a rare day off. I saw 2 police officers confronting a 16-year-old boy named Kevin. They were accusing him of theft based on nothing more than a vague description and the fact that he had a skateboard. I watched them ignore another possible suspect, a white teenager who was actually leaving the scene. And when I asked questions, as any citizen has the right to do, I was arrested, roughly handled, and had my clothing torn in the process. She paused, letting that sink in. Now I could stand here and be angry about how I was treated. And I am angry. But my anger isn't about what happened to me. My anger is about what this reveals about our justice system. Michelle looked directly into the cameras. If this can happen to me, a woman with power, authority, and resources, imagine what happens to people without those advantages. Imagine what happens every single day to people of color who are stopped, questioned, arrested, and processed through a system that sees them as suspects first and citizens second. She could see reporters frantically typing, cameras zooming in on her face. Yesterday, I experienced something that millions of Americans experience regularly. I was profiled. I was dismissed. I was treated as a threat simply for asking questions. And when I stood up for what was right, I was punished for it. The only difference between me and countless others is that I had federal agents who came to get me. Most people don't get that phone call answered. Most people sit in those holding cells for days, not hours. Michelle's voice grew stronger. So here's what's going to happen. The Riverside County Precinct will undergo a complete federal review. We will examine their arrest patterns, their use of force reports, and their complaint records. We will look for systemic issues and we will address them. But we won't stop there. She leaned forward slightly. I'm announcing today that the FBI will be expanding its Civil Rights Division to investigate patterns of police misconduct across the country. We will work with local departments that want to reform, and we will take action against departments that refuse to change. The room erupted with shouted questions, but Michelle held up her hand. I'm not done. I also want to address something important. Some people have asked why I didn't immediately identify myself as FBI director. The answer is simple. I shouldn't have had to. My authority to ask questions about police conduct doesn't come from my job title. It comes from my rights as an American citizen. Every person has the right to question authority. Every person has the right to stand up when they see injustice. The moment we lose that, we lose everything this country is supposed to stand for. She glanced down at her arms where the bruises were still visible. I'm showing you these bruises not for sympathy but as evidence. Evidence that excessive force is real. Evidence that it happens to people from all walks of life. Evidence that we need change. Michelle straightened up. To the officers involved, Daniels and Brooks, I want you to know something. I don't hate you, but I do expect you to be better. You swore an oath to protect and serve. That means protecting everyone. Even people who ask difficult questions. Even people who make you uncomfortable. Even people who don't look like you. She looked back at the cameras. And to everyone watching, if you see injustice, speak up. If you see someone being treated unfairly, say something. Don't assume someone else will handle it. Don't think it's not your problem, because it is all of our problem, and it will keep being our problem until we all decide to fix it. Michelle closed her folder. I'll take a few questions now. The room exploded with noise, everyone shouting at once. 3 weeks after the press conference, Michelle stood at the entrance of Riverside County High School. The parking lot was full, and she could see people streaming into the auditorium. This wasn't an official FBI event. This was something more personal. Kevin had asked her to speak at a community forum about police relations. His mother had called Michelle's office directly, and Michelle had said yes immediately. If she was going to talk about change, she needed to do it in the places where change mattered most. Crawford walked beside her, along with 2 other agents. They'd tried to talk her out of this, worried about security, about optics, about a dozen other concerns. But Michelle had been firm. She needed to be here. Inside, the auditorium was packed. Michelle saw Kevin sitting in the front row with his mother, a strong-looking woman who'd clearly been crying recently. The past 3 weeks had been hard on them. The video of Kevin's confrontation had gone viral alongside Michelle's arrest footage. He'd become a face of the movement, whether he wanted to be or not. The principal introduced Michelle, and she walked to the microphone. Looking out at the crowd, she saw faces of every color, every age. Police officers in uniform sat next to activists wearing protest t-shirts. Teachers sat with students. This was what America looked like when you got past all the noise. "Thank you for being here," Michelle started. "I'm not going to give you a speech full of statistics or policy proposals. There are plenty of those. Tonight, I want to talk about what happened 3 weeks ago, what I've learned since then, and where we go from here." She looked at Kevin. 3 weeks ago, I went to a farmer's market looking for a normal Saturday afternoon. Instead, I watched a young man get stopped for no reason other than how he looked. When I asked why, I was told to mind my business. When I persisted, I was arrested. My clothes were torn. I was handcuffed and processed like a criminal. And all of it was caught on video for the world to see. The audience was completely quiet. In the days since, I've received thousands of messages, people sharing their own stories of being stopped, questioned, arrested, harassed. Black men telling me about being pulled over for driving nice cars. Latina mothers describing watching their sons get profiled. Asian Americans explaining how they're treated like perpetual foreigners. And white allies admitting they never fully understood because it never happened to them. Michelle paused. The question I keep getting asked is, are you glad this happened? And the honest answer is complicated. Am I glad I was humiliated and arrested? No. Am I glad my torn dress is now an internet meme? Definitely not. But am I glad that people are finally having conversations they should have been having years ago? Yes, absolutely yes. She moved away from the podium, wanting to be closer to the audience. Here's what I learned in that holding cell. I sat there with a woman who told me she'd been arrested 3 times that year for minor offenses. Each time she couldn't make bail. Each time she lost days of work. She was stuck in a cycle she couldn't break out of, and it had nothing to do with being a criminal. It had everything to do with being poor and being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Michelle looked around the room. That woman's name is Patricia. She's here tonight. Patricia, would you stand up? In the middle section, a woman slowly stood. It was the same woman from the holding cell, looking nervous but determined. After I got out, I made sure Patricia got help with her cases. Turns out 2 of those arrests never should have happened. The charges were dropped. But she'd already spent nights in jail, already lost her job, already had her life disrupted. Michelle's voice grew stronger. That's what we're fighting against, not just the dramatic moments that end up on video, but the daily grind of a system that treats some people as disposable. A hand went up in the audience. Michelle nodded for the person to speak. Director Carter, what about the officers involved? Do you think they should be fired? Michelle had been expecting this question. Officers Daniels and Brooks are facing federal civil rights charges. They've been terminated from the Riverside County Force. But you know what? Firing them doesn't fix the problem. They're products of a system that trained them to see threats instead of people. A system that rewarded aggression and punished de-escalation. She took a breath. I've actually spoken with both of them since that day. Long conversations about what happened and why. And what I found was that they genuinely believed they were doing their jobs correctly. They'd been taught to assert dominance, to control situations, to never back down. Nobody taught them to listen. Nobody taught them that admitting a mistake is stronger than doubling down on a bad call. Another hand, a young black woman this time. What about Kevin? What's being done for him? Michelle smiled and gestured for Kevin to stand. He did, looking uncomfortable with the attention. Kevin is one of the bravest people I know. He stood there that day and kept his composure even though he was terrified. He cooperated even though he'd done nothing wrong. And since then, he's become an advocate for change. He's talked to other young people about their rights. He's participated in community forums. He's shown more maturity at 16 than many adults show their whole lives. The audience applauded. Kevin sat down quickly, but Michelle could see his mother beaming with pride. As for what's being done for him specifically, a scholarship fund has been established in his name. Several universities have already reached out with full ride offers. But more importantly, we're making sure that what happened to him doesn't happen to other kids. The Riverside County Police Department has implemented new training protocols. They're using body cameras on all interactions. And they're working with community leaders to rebuild trust. An older white man stood up without waiting to be called on. I'm a retired police officer. 30 years on the force. And I have to say, I think you're being too hard on cops. We risk our lives every day. We make split-second decisions. Monday morning quarterbacking isn't fair. Michelle nodded, respecting the comment. You're absolutely right that policing is difficult. You're right that officers face genuine dangers. I would never minimize that. My own father was a police officer. I grew up understanding the stress, the fear, the impossible situations cops face. She walked closer to where he was standing. But here's the thing. We can honor the difficulty of the job and still demand excellence. We can appreciate the risks officers take and still insist on accountability. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, holding officers to high standards makes all officers safer because it builds community trust. The man considered this, then slowly nodded and sat down. Michelle returned to the front. The review of Riverside County's arrest records revealed something troubling, but not surprising. Over the past 5 years, black residents were 3 times more likely to be stopped and arrested than white residents, even though crime rates were similar across racial groups. Traffic stops, loitering charges, suspicious person calls, all showed significant racial disparities. She pulled out a folder from her bag. But here's what gives me hope. After we presented these findings, Captain Morrison didn't make excuses. He didn't blame bad apples. He acknowledged the systemic problems and committed to fixing them. The department is now tracking every stop by race, reason, and outcome. They're holding quarterly public forums. They're actively recruiting officers from diverse backgrounds. Michelle looked around the room again. That's what real reform looks like. Not just firing the officers who get caught on video. Not just issuing statements about how seriously we take these matters. Real reform means looking at data, acknowledging patterns, and changing the systems that create those patterns.